What's good, y'all? Track Kennedy with StudioSounds.com back with a brand new tutorial. In this tutorial, I'll be showing you guys how to make a sample Bryson type beat. This is based on more of his early work, but I'll be covering more of his new stuff in upcoming tutorials as well. This track is actually really simple. It's a sample, drums, a bass line, some transition effects, but it's probably one of the more popular beats I play for people. The only issue ever with tracks like this that are sample heavy is that it's super hard for any smaller artist to even clear any sample, let alone a sample like this from a major artist. So that's the reason I usually avoid sampling, but for this particular beat, I thought the sample was just kind of too dope to leave alone. I used the OVO, the Dynasty Volume 2 for the bass line, the Mustard and the Bank collection for the transition. All the drums are from the Legends Never Die kit, and you can find all of that linked in the description below right now for anyone who is interested. Please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. It helps us a ton. Without further talking, let's go ahead and jump into this tutorial. So for this particular beat, I'm going to go ahead and start with the hook, and then I'll go ahead and break the verses down from there. Just try to make it as simple as possible. So the very first thing that I want to talk about is the actual sample. If you listen to a beat like this, the sample really does like 90% of the work. Everything that I did here was really just trying to accent the sample and not really overdo it and just let it kind of do the work here. So a valid question usually is, well, where do we even find a sample like this? You can't really make a beat like this if you don't know how to find a sample like this. So usually what I do these days is I search anything that has playlists. So whether it's Spotify, YouTube, anything where people can just create their own little custom music playlists, and I'll search for whatever kind of mood or feel I'm looking for. It might be stuff like ambient R&B, my favorite R&B songs, slept on R&B songs, emotional songs that make me cry, my favorite songs, like whatever I can think of that might lead me to stuff that I haven't heard before. I'll just search it through there. And the cool thing about that is that you're basically searching by a mood or a feel, so you'll get a bunch of different songs that fit that mood or style you're looking for. So it's just very easy and practical just to run through them, and you can play them all in one spot. So that's usually what I do if you're having trouble finding samples. That's what I would recommend. So now that we've talked about where to find samples, let's just go ahead and take a look at what I did to this sample and how I arranged it. So this actual sample, if you take a look at it, it has one section that's higher, one section that's basically just pitched down. It's the exact same sample, just pitched down, and then this section is what's used throughout the verses. So the very first thing that I'll play is this little top section, so let's go ahead and take a listen to that. And this is basically just the sample by itself with a compressor and a little filter on it. So that's the little top end sample. So the very next thing I did was go ahead and clone it. So just right click and you can clone. And then from there, I just went and dragged the pitch all the way down 1200 cents. Now in FL Studio, if you have a sample like this that's not pitched at all, so it's at 0, if you clone it and you go 1200 cents down or 1200 cents up, it will still layer perfectly with the original sample. It'll just be an octave or two higher or an octave too lower depending on how far you twist this. But it's just an easy way to get kind of interesting layers. So once I had that first section, I layer this to it. So let's go ahead and take a listen to that. Alright, so this little section right here is where the actual verse section would start coming in at. So let's go ahead and just enable that. And the actual way that I brought it in was using a little crossfade, which is actually down here. And the way you do that is you select the samples that you want to crossfade. For example, it was this in mine, and you just go ahead and click crossfade and then select the sample you want to crossfade it with. And what this allows you to do is if you have two samples that are a little bit different, for example, even though these are from the same song, they just have a different energy and a different kind of feel to them. So to just smoothly transition stuff like this, I'll just use a crossfade. And what it basically does is just reduces one as the other one kind of turns up. So you have just a nice, cool, smooth transition. So here's what it sounds like. And then when you combine that little crossfade with the transition effect that I have on pattern 7, which is just from Massive, and this is just from the Mustard Bank, just a little riser, but when you combine that, this is what you get. So you just have that nice suspense to go ahead and drop into the verse from there, and you don't have really any awkward transitions. So this is basically the sample. If you kind of look at throughout the track, it doesn't really change up much. The only difference is this little section over here where I chopped a little different piece for the intro. Let me just go ahead and find and enable that real quick so I can show you guys that, and then we'll jump into the hook. So with this little section, I basically just chopped the little piece directly before the main section of the sample, just so I had a nice little build up to it. And then it breaks into the verse there. So let's go ahead and jump to the next section. I'll start breaking down the drums. So as I told you guys earlier, I felt like the sample really did most of the work in this track. So everything that I added here, including the drums, was just kind of to make it hit hard, but not really overdo it or overcrowd the track. So let's go ahead and just start with the kick and the snares. So this is what they sound like with the actual sample. So we have two different snares in here. This one has just a slight delay on here. You just want to go ahead and load up your Fruity delay. Right click on time, click one step. Then you want to just turn the volume down and pick a side for the panning and make sure it's on ping pong, just so it'll bounce from speaker to speaker. And I just thought that gave it some movement and made it a little bit more interesting than just a regular snare. And then the second one is, again, we have a Maximus on here, as I did with the first one, and then just one of the warmness, no latency settings on here, and then just have a heavier reverb on here just to make it slightly more dramatic. And that's pretty much it for the actual kick and the snare. So the next thing I wanted to add to this was this hi-hat. So I have this actual pattern up there on pattern 1, and then I have this pattern as well. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete this for a second just so you guys can hear pattern 1, and I'll bring it back to pattern 4 and show you guys that. So very simple pattern, just a couple little chops and a couple little third rolls in here. Just kind of follow it up, and then just a couple chops that match the actual kick pattern just to make it a little bit more dramatic and make it sound a little bit better in my opinion. And then what I did to this as well was just added a little bit of a delay. A lot of the stuff that you'll hear in here has a delay in it, just because I felt like the track was so airy and open. The delays added an interesting kind of element in there just to make it not so repetitive and kind of fill up the space a little bit more evenly. So it has a delay on here, just a little 2-step delay. And again, turn the panning to whatever side you want, turn the volume down, just set it to ping pong. And then if we go to pattern 4, and go into here, and let me just go ahead and get it back real quick. This is the second little hi-hat, which just kind of accents it, and I thought sounded cool. So when you add this together, this is what you have. And then we have a second little hi-hat in here. If you guys remember, a couple of tutorials ago, I told you guys I like to use these little kind of accent type hi-hats. So that's all that is in here. A very simple pattern, as you could tell, just for each 8 steps. And then I just have this very simple little crash in here. And this is from the Perfect Weekend kit, actually. So this is the only sound that's not from the Legends Never Die kit. But again, simple little delay on here. And then just an EQ to get rid of all the frequencies I don't need. But when you stack it together, this is what you have. So that pretty much covers the drums for the hook and for the actual verse as well. There's a slight little drum change up later in the verse. But before we get to that, let's jump to the next section and I'll show you guys the bass line real quick. So the actual preset for the bass line came from OVO The Dynasty Volume 2 for Silence. And here's what it sounds like by itself. And then when you combine it with everything else, this is what you end up with. So very, very simple, but just kind of sounds good in there. Has a nice little feel. And if you ever have trouble kind of playing along with samples, what I'd recommend you do first is the first thing you always want to do is just kind of find the key. So what I'll usually just do is load up a clean sound like a piano or something like that and just start finding the key of the track. And then once I have that, I'll load up my actual bass note. And when I used to have trouble actually finding notes and stuff, I would just play it really, really high. So play my bass line like super high like that even. And it will just kind of help you hear the actual notes a little bit better, just to make sure you don't really play as many sour notes. But the best thing you can really do is just keep doing and keep practicing and kind of building your ear, playing along to different melodies and stuff like that. And over time, it just starts to become a lot easier. It just kind of clicks. But just keep practicing and keep doing it is the best advice I can give you for this. That's pretty much what helped me. But anyway, without further talking, let's go ahead and jump to the next section and talk about this little verse. So basically for this track, the only real changes are going to be over here. So I'm going to go ahead and let it play just from this little second section of the hook, and then let this little B section of the verse play, and then I'll go ahead and break down the patterns for you guys real quick. So basically, once I had this little A section of the hook, it needed a change up for B. So the first thing I started doing was just going through different instrument synths and trying to find different instruments that would work in there. This sample just kind of is so airy and has just a certain feel to it that everything that I added to it was either overpowering or just kind of sounded out of place. So that basically just left me with different drum patterns and grooves to use to try to kind of make change ups so it wouldn't be too boring. So that's what you're seeing here. So the very first thing I did was I just took pattern 1 and I just copied the entire pattern 1 section, and I copied it down to pattern 9. And then the next thing I did was just make sure that this kick was a little bit busier in this section, just to kind of pick up the speed and make it seem a little bit faster than it actually is. But as you can see, still a very, very simple pattern. And then if we actually look at the hi-hats are kind of what give it a little bit of the faster movement. So there's a bunch of little fourth step little rolls in here. So that's all you're seeing in these. But here's what it sounds like by itself. So just a very simple pattern. And then we have pattern 8, which is even more simple. We get rid of a lot of those rolls and kind of tone it down a little bit. And those just kind of help bring in a little bit of a new groove, bring in a little bit of a tempo to the track, and we're just a nice little change up to me. All right, let me just take a look at it, make sure there's nothing else I'm missing in here, and there isn't. So that pretty much covers the entire track. I'm going to go ahead and play it from the top for you guys again. Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button for more videos. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys learned something new. Until next time, studiosounds.com.
Track Kennedy.